We hear so much about division these days, but what if I told you something truly remarkable is happening at the very top of our legal system? We're going to dive into a series of unanimous Supreme Court rulings that are quietly, but believe me, powerfully reshaping the entire country. Let's get right into it.
Turn on the TV, scroll through your news feed. What's the story you always hear? It's about a Supreme Court that's totally polarized, right? Split right down ideological lines. All we ever seem to talk about are the 5-4 decisions, the political fights, the bitter divides.
But what if that's not the whole picture? What if behind all that noise, the real story is actually one of unity? A powerful trend is emerging, a whole series of unanimous decisions that are rewriting the rulebook on everything from police accountability to the power of the federal government itself.
9-0. You just gotta let that sink in for a second. In the highest court in the land, that number is a massive statement. It means every single justice, liberal, conservative, appointed by different presidents over decades, they all agreed. This isn't about politics. This is about crystal clear constitutional principles.
And you have to see just how rare this is. Over the past decade, unanimous rulings, they made up less than 6% of all the cases. That tiny little sliver represents some of the most profound and permanent shifts in American law. And guess what? They're happening right now.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at why this unity is so darn powerful. Then, we'll see how it's reaffirming your rights and protecting your money. After that, we'll tackle how it's rebalancing the government. And finally, what this new era of clarity really means for all of us.
So, first things first, why does a 9-0 ruling matter so much more than a split decision? Well, it really all boils down to two words: authority and permanence.
Think about it. A 5-4 decision? It's fragile. It's kind of like it's built on sand. The second one justice leaves or a new one is appointed, the whole thing could be overturned. It always has this political cloud hanging over it. But a 9-0 ruling? That thing is a legal fortress. It sends a message to every single lower court, to every cop, to every company, that on this particular point of law, the debate is over, period.
Okay, so how does all this legal authority actually translate into real-world protections for you? Let's start with something incredibly important: your physical safety and your fundamental rights as a citizen.
And that brings us to a huge case called Barnes v. Felix. This one tackled the critical issue of police accountability, and the court's unanimous decision completely changed the game for excessive force cases.
You see, for decades, police were often shielded by something called the moment of threat doctrine. Now, what that meant was that in court, a judge could only look at the exact split-second a threat occurred. So if an officer's own reckless actions created the danger in the first place, well, legally, that didn't matter.
The Supreme Court, all 9 of them, threw that doctrine right out the window. Now courts are required to look at the totality of circumstances, everything an officer did leading up to the use of force. This is a massive shift. Legal experts say this one decision immediately affects over 4,000 pending cases, creating a brand new, much tougher standard for accountability.
But the court didn't just stop at physical safety. In another case, SEC versus Jarcasi, they took on the massive power of federal agencies to pretty much act as their own judge, jury, and executioner. And in doing so, they reaffirmed one of your most basic constitutional rights.
What was happening was that agencies could handle these huge disputes internally, often with no impartial jury. The court unanimously put a stop to it. They restored the 7th Amendment right to a jury trial for civil penalties. The message couldn't be clearer. The government now has to face you in a real, open court of law.
All right, next up, let's talk about your wallet. We're going to see how this newfound unity from the court is having a direct impact on your financial life, from your paycheck all the way to your freedom from unjust debt. So, in EMD Sales v. Carrera, the court dove into the super complicated world of overtime pay. See, different states had all these different rules, which created a ton of confusion and led to endless lawsuits. The court stepped in, and with a 9-0 vote, they created a single, uniform standard for the whole country. And get this, the economic impact is just staggering. By creating one clear, consistent legal framework, experts estimate this ruling alone will save the U.S. economy over $112 million every single year. That's real money, and it brings much-needed predictability for both workers and their employers. And then there's the case of Ellingberg v. United States. This ruling took on a deeply unfair practice that was trapping thousands of people who'd already served their time in this endless cycle of debt.
They called it shadow sentences. Here's the problem. The government was retroactively jacking up restitution debt, sometimes decades after a sentence was finished. In another 9-0 decision, the court said no more. They declared that restitution is a criminal punishment, and it can't be unfairly increased after the fact. This gives people a real shot at actually rebuilding their lives.
Okay, now let's zoom out a bit. These individual cases are all pieces of a much bigger puzzle. What we're really seeing is a fundamental rebalancing of power, away from federal agencies and back toward the courts and the Constitution.
And the biggest piece of this puzzle, it's the end of something called Chevron deference. For 40 years, this legal doctrine basically said that if a law was a bit fuzzy, courts should just go with whatever federal agencies like the EPA or the SEC thought it meant. In other words, it let bureaucrats, not judges, decide what the law is. Well, that era is officially over.
Just look at this chart. It shows you everything you need to know about this power shift. Before this ruling, agencies won nearly 70% of their court challenges. Now, their win rate has absolutely plummeted to just 16%. The bottom line is that judges, not unelected officials, now have the final say on what the law actually means.
So, when you put it all together, what does it all mean? This isn't really about left versus right. It's about a return to clarity, to accountability, and to the actual words written in the Constitution.
So let's just quickly recap the new protections we've talked about. Because of these 9-0 rulings, you now have stronger safeguards for your physical safety, more financial security, and a much clearer right to a fair day in court. Federal agencies are being held accountable, and power is shifting. This is like a fundamental rewiring of how the government interacts with all of us.
It really seems like the era of unaccountable bureaucracy is coming to an end, and an era of constitutional clarity is just beginning. These rulings are going to shape this country for decades to come, and it leaves us with one heck of a question. As the court continues to find this surprising, powerful unity, what part of American life is going to be reshaped next?